We're live. What is up, friends? Let me just get the URL for this, and then we can get started. As soon as we get redirected, there we go. Okay, so this is Office Hours. Welcome to Office Hours. If you haven't been here before, it's a fun place where we answer people's questions. So there are a couple of new things about the way that we're going to be doing Office Hours. So if you haven't done Office Hours before, then all of this is new. Before, we had this role that I would assign you to that you could opt into anytime you wanted to join Office Hours, so notify Office Hours. But now I wanted to make it so that anybody could do Office Hours if they wanted to, and live streams and everything. And so I created this idea of meetups. I actually morphed our schedule stream stuff that Marco worked on into this idea of meetups. And so now you can go to follow me and raise your hand to be notified anytime I start a meetup, which Office Hours is a meetup. Or you can go to the upcoming meetups, and these are the scheduled meetups. So this is a recurring meetup that happens every Saturday at 9:30 a.m. my time, Mountain Time. And so you can raise your hand on this. So if you don't want to be notified every time I start a meetup, then you can come here and just be notified when I start Office Hours meetups. You don't have to do both. If you follow me, then you'll be notified of anytime I do any meetup, but you can if you want. And then I also have the my live streams. That's also a meetup, and you can raise your hand for that as well. So yeah, I guess that's all that I have to say about the way things are going to go. I'm going to keep on doing the notification Office Hours thing for a while until we've kind of transitioned pretty well. But yeah, you'll want to switch over to that. So all of that said, if you are totally new and to this Office Hours thing, then welcome, and you can join on Discord. And there's awesome, cool, fun things that you can do here on Discord. For my Office Hours, I have this special channel where you can add questions and stuff, and I will give answers during Office Hours. This is mostly so that as people ask me questions throughout the week, I don't have to get derailed or nerd sniped on these different questions and just get nothing done. I just put it all at once and get as many questions answered as I can. So that's the idea. I give priority to people who are actually in the Zoom call. So yeah, hopefully that motivates some folks to join the Zoom call. But if you can't make it, then you can just post in the Office Hours channel here. So with all that said, what questions do we have in Zoom? I'll just wait a second in case people can't find their mute button. Okay, feel free to interrupt me because you do get priority. Steve, hey there.
Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Okay, last week I was having trouble with my mic, so I wasn't sure if it was working. Okay, I'm trying to get my mental model straight on different kinds of state still. Um, um, First of all, like when like state and storage, are they two different? Should I have two different mental models for that? Like basically, when you talk about saving, like when you talk about like global state, is that stuff that you would save to the database, and then local state is stuff that you wouldn't save to the database, or am I confusing those, like state and storage?
Yeah, I can talk about that a little bit for sure. So state is like at a fundamental level, state is something that is like data that changes over time. And so it's like if we're talking about a platform like Twitter or something, you're well, maybe that's not the perfect example because tweets don't actually change over time. You
Well,
can't edit
actually,
those.
I guess let me try to let me make you understand what I'm trying, where I'm coming from. Like basically, you were saying like when you're talking about Redux, you're saying people would just throw everything into their Redux store or something, and there's stuff that you don't need to throw into the Redux store, like if you're if you're hovering over something, or if like a window is open or something, right? Or if, am I making sense?
Yeah.
Like, so basically, all right, sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, hold on. I just noticed this comment from Renee. Is my screen share is black? Is that? Oh,
Yeah, your screen share is black.
bummer. Yeah, I never look at the chat. Sorry. Here, let me try sharing again. Is that better? Can you see my screen now?
No, still black.
Still black.
Yeah.
Huh. I actually changed some settings in Zoom related to screen share recently. So let me just check on that and try to share again. Maybe Zoom busted something. Any better now? Still black? Bummer. Okay.
Still black.
Well, we're just gonna try this without sharing screen, and hopefully I don't need to share anything with you. So yeah, to answer the question about state, so state in general is data that changes over time. And where state is stored has a relevance to where you should be, how you should be treating and thinking about that state, and then where state is used has relevance to where you're going to. Steve just added a comment here. Let me
Yeah, I'm
take
just
a look.
trying to kind of post where my mental model is. I don't know if it makes sense or not, but that might help.
Yeah, I'll read through this and I'll just give you pointers in what
When
you
I
said.
talk about derived state, I'm talking about something that can be like, say you have the time in military time, but you want to show it in AM PM. You don't need to save that in state. You could actually just base that on the military time, right? So that would
Yep.
be like derived state.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
So yeah, then you have local state is state contained in to a component it's declared in, not shared with other components. Yes, that's true. And you have to keep in mind too that local state doesn't necessarily mean that it isn't saved on the server when we're talking about that. So that the is open, is loading, whatever, those types of Boolean states, or even the value of an input or something like that. That can be tied to a specific component, or it could be something that other components need to know about as well. And so when we talk about, and on top of that too, like let's say that you have some state that is persisted in the back end. Maybe there's only one component that cares about that state, and so that component will be responsible for fetching that and interacting with it. So yeah, that local state. When we talk about local state in a React context, this is a state that's within a single component, and it does. You can't.
Client state.
What?
Sorry to interrupt you. Is that synonymous with client state, local state, and client state, or is
No,
it's
not. So state can be when we talk about local state, that's just a state within a single component. It's not coming from other like parent components or from context or whatever. And so like where that state is stored, that like it could be in local storage, it could be in the database in the back end, or wherever, but it's being handled within a single component. That's what we're talking about when we say local state. Right. And so yeah, then you have shared state needs to be accessed by another component. Yeah, I sometimes refer to that as shared state, whether you're passing it via context or props. Either way, you could classify that as shared state. Global state would, yeah, something that needs to be accessed by all components. The interesting thing here is that it's kind of there's a bit of gray here because you have, let's say you have this one component that's managing the state, but then you have a sibling component over here. And so you find the least common parent between those two, and that's where the state is now shared between those. Now, is that global state? No, because you have other components around. But what if this component has the state, and then this component all the way on the other side of the tree also needs that state, and the least common parent is the app component? Well, okay, so now you've moved this up to be shared in the app component, and so technically that becomes global state, but it's the same idea as shared state. It just happens to be at the top. So there's the difference between shared state and global state is kind of murky because it technically global state is shared state. I feel like there was another, actually, I do have a blog post that I'm going to show you. You've probably seen it already, but just in case. Yeah, in fact, I can't share my screen, so that's a total bummer. Here, let me see if I can share just Chrome or something, because I know that sometimes they let you share a single app. I don't think that this is going to work, but we will try. Can you see that? Is it black?
Black.
No dice.
Can only see your cursor.
You see my cursor, but on my screen?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Huh. That's super weird. I'm gonna blame Zoom on that one. I'm trying to think. Actually, I did upgrade to Big Sur, and I don't think that I've had a success, or I have tried screen sharing since then. Maybe I have. Can't remember, but hopefully it's just this time. Yeah, anyway, so let's talk about the local storage. So when I say local storage, I'm talking about the actual local storage API in the browser. So you can open up your DevTools and you'll see in the application tab, there's a spot there for local storage. So this is actually an API.
We were talking about that a few weeks ago, and I was mentioning how I had my Firebase set up with local storage, and I would check that first. And you were saying that I would get into trouble with stale data or something like that. I still haven't seen how that happens, but
yeah.
I mean,
so
I'll bring that back up once you finish talking about what you were talking about.
Okay. Yeah, global storage. That I don't know what that would be. So like. Local storage is just a storage mechanism. It's a place that we store stuff. It's an API. It's not a concept. It's an actual API. Global storage is not a concept that I've ever heard of. But what you might be thinking of that is like a saving something to a database, some backend or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, like you don't need to save. If a task, like say you have a to-do list and a task is currently being hovered, you don't need to save that to your global state, but or like say maybe the order you have your tasks arranged in, something like that wouldn't make it, like if that was lost. Never mind. Go ahead.
No, that's a fine example. So if you have a to-do list and then you can sort it by alphabetically, or you can sort it by due date or something, that's probably like there could be use cases for saving that in some global or in some database, so that every time I load up the application, regardless of what device I'm on, it's always going to be sorted in the right way. That could be a use case for actually storing that. And persisting that into something that's accessible regardless of what client that I'm using. But more often, you're going to have like, you'll probably put that in like a component state, whatever component's responsible for rendering those to-dos. Or
use case for saving it in local storage?
I mean, it just depends. Like where you store it depends on your use case. So let's take the simplest use case. I want to be able to sort these to-dos, and if I refresh the browser, then I'm fine with it not having the same sorting. Okay, So for that use case, that would just be a simple, use state inside of the component that's responsible for rendering those. Now, let's say I'm actually not okay with the sorting changing when I refresh the browser. I want it to stay where it's sorted. Well, the next thing that you might try is storing that state in the URL. And so you change the sorting, and what that actually does is it doesn't update the any component state or anything. It just updates the URL, and then you base your sorting based on what the URL is. So it could be like slash due date or something like that, or even a query string or something. But let's say, and then when you refresh, because you're deriving the sort based on what's in the URL, refreshing will work just fine. But let's say that you want it to be persisted like that you want that sorting method to remain even on refresh, but you don't want to update the URL. For some reason, you just don't want to do it that way. That would be a good use case for local storage. So when they change the sorting, you update it in local storage, they hit refresh, you pull that setting from local storage, and then you sort it accordingly. Now let's say that you decide you want to actually make that sorting, like if I update the sorting on my computer and then I go to my phone, I want to have that sorting be persisted between the two. So if I make a change on one and then I go to the other, then it has that that sorting option on the other. So that's when we start talking about saving it in a database, because there's no way for you. Well, I mean, I think there are ways to do this. Some WebRTC like communication between devices and stuff, but I don't know how to do that. So the typical way to do this would be to say, let's save that in a database, and then the phone can go get that setting from the database and sort accordingly. So that kind of takes us from local state that isn't persisted at all the way to global or to persisted state that yeah, and it just depends on the use case. And saving it in a database is a lot harder than just saving it in a client, like yeah, in like a use state in a component. And that's why we normally start on this end of the spectrum and only go to the other end when we have the use cases for it.
And then, okay, when you were talking about the stale data with local storage and Firebase, is that if you were having like a multi-user app like Facebook or like a social, like where like different users were logging in? Is that the type of situation where I would run into stale data? Like if it's just, say I have a to-do list and I'm the only person that has access to that particular to-do list, well, how would my local storage ever go out of sync with the database?
So let's say that you are persisting that stuff in local storage on your desktop, and you make a bunch of changes and everything, and now it's all persisted. And then you go over to your phone and you make a ton of changes on your phone, and then you come back to your desktop. Now what's in your desktop local storage is out of sync with what is in Firebase.
The way I do it is I save it to Firebase, and then Firebase does like on snapshot and then it updates local state. So anytime the app re-renders, the first thing it does is it grabs from local state.
Right. Okay. So that's fine. My question then is why are you saving it in local storage? Like what benefit do you get out of saving it in local storage at all? In fact, if I remember correctly, the Firebase API works offline anyway. They do a bunch of stuff to make things work offline already. So you're just doing extra work. I'm not sure I understand why you need to save it in local storage.
Because, okay, when you first log in, it would have to get state from Cloud Firestore, correct? If it wanted to have, unless it was just, so that's, I guess it's just when you first log in. I mean, why? Okay, I see this pattern a lot when even in like tutorials and stuff. Like like your original state will be stored in local storage, so it'll be like, I don't know, like your login. I mean, your user info. Do you ever see that where people save, like they put set state and it'll be like local storage, or if there's nothing in local storage, it'll be like initial state. whatever that hard-coded thing is. Am I making sense? No?
Yeah, I've seen this in tutorials. I've used it in tutorials, but not when I use it in tutorials, it's like, hey, let's saving into local storage is a side effect. Let me teach you how to use effect to do that. So it's not really for as like a mechanism for like what it sounds like what you're trying to do is you're trying to do your own caching, which is there are reasons to do this. But I'm pretty sure that Firebase does this. Yeah, in fact, let me just Google it. Firebase offline. Access data offline. If you just go to Firebase, you can configure offline persistence, and then you wouldn't have to worry about this at all. In fact, yeah, there it is. Firebase Firestore enable persistence. And then
for authorization.
Sorry, what?
I think that persistence is for authorization, so you don't have to log in.
Well, they're calling it on the Firestore
Really?
thing. So that's what I would look at. It just seems like you're doing a bunch of work just for I don't want to say no good reason, but that's yeah. And you know what? I don't know your use case. Maybe like there could be a good reason to do this, but any Firebase app, like I've got Firebase apps that I use on a regular basis, and I've never bothered with implementing my own caching for that because it always seems to work pretty well to just to go to Firebase all the time. So
okay, I'll look into that some more and see if I can find out if there is actually a use case or if I'm just doing something superfluous.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Anyone else here in Zoom have a question?
I mean, I've got more questions, but I don't want to be a hog. So let me know if I have time to ask more questions later on.
Okay. Yeah, I think we've got Ahmed has a question raised hand there. Go ahead.
Hey, Kent.
Hi.
So you talk a lot about state collocation. So you say that we should move our state to the least common component, which is really good. But what do you think about the reactive variables that the Apollo version 3 introduced? Because they don't render all the tree. You just get the new value in your component with them. Like they're based on the observable pattern of the JavaScript. So
I'm not familiar with this Apollo thing. What did you say it was called?
Reactive variables.
Reactive variables?
Yeah.
That sounds a lot like MobX. They do a very similar thing where they only render your component when the variables you care about change. And that's fine. If you want to use that, that sounds great. The state collocation is about more than just performance, though. It's also about making. It's about maintainability. And when you have all of your state stored globally, you typically put it in your file system and in the files in a global location. And that has a lot of implications on whether or on what files you have to touch and what code you're interacting with when you need to make a change to that particular element of state. And so that increases the surface area for bugs to slip in because you might actually make a change that you aren't aware that somebody else is relying on this particular thing of state. Like this is one of the big problems that people have had with CSS for a long time. They just can never delete it because they don't know who's getting impacted by it. And the reason for that is because it's a global namespace. Everything is in this like giant global everything. And so when you put everything globally like that, then you run into some of the same issues. And that was my big beef with Redux. It wasn't the technology itself. It was just what people were doing with the technology by putting everything into global state rather than co-locating that state. So yeah, that's what I think about those things. Like it's great if it's better for performance. That's awesome. I think that it's even better for performance to co-locate state. And if you have to, you move it up to the lowest part of the tree that it can be. And if that ends up being global, then fine. If that ends up being a performance problem, then you reach for different tools that can help you solve those performance problems. But often, like, it's not. Most of the time you put all of your state that is persisted, put that in something like React Query so it can manage all of that separate from everything else, and then put all of your everything else in just a couple of context providers. And unless you have thousands of consumers of that context value and you're changing it all the time, you'll probably be fine. And if you do have thousands of consumers and you are changing it all the time or something, triggering a bunch of re-renders and unnecessary re-renders, well, actually, first, if all those renders are necessary, well, then you've just got a problem in general, because you're just doing a lot of stuff, and you may have to step outside of React for that, which people do sometimes. But if you're finding yourself doing a lot of unnecessary re-renders, well, then React has a toolbox of tools that you can use to optimize those away and get rid of some of those. But I really rarely find myself reaching for those tools. It's just for the typical application, you don't run into those things. Sometimes you've got really interactive UIs, and like you're drag and drop and all, like a bunch of D3 charts and whatever. And in those situations, that's why tools like Recoil and Jotai exist, to handle those specific use cases. But I just, outside of those sorts of things, I really don't run into performance problems when I just co-locate my state. So yeah, that's my thoughts on all of that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I see that there are a couple of questions here in the Discord. So let me see.
I had one from last week. It's more like a opinion from you. I think there's a link for his code sandbox that I sent us.
Yeah, I remember that.
Let me, I think it's up here. Yeah. I'll just reply to it, so it's in the bottom there.
Okay.
Here.
Thank you.
Just your opinion on like detaching like component behavior. It's not all the time for sure, because it won't be necessary all the time, but detaching component behavior from component UI.
Okay. I think you may have forgotten to save the code sandbox, because this is just a default. Do you still have it?
I don't think so. Then I'll write another one and bring it another time. But essentially, it's like my component was just the UI, it was just the JSX, and I had a hook that exported the props, and then you just like attach those two, so you can have different hooks with different behaviors.
Yeah. That's like the prop getters pattern. Yeah, totally. A thing that I have done. And Downshift does this. Is that what you're talking about, or is this different?
I think it's the same principle. I have to check the get props, but I think it's the same principle. But like the component has no logic at all. It's just the UI, and then you as props, you export the methods, and then you just bind the behavior hook with the component. But I think it's pretty similar to the getter props.
Yeah. So I just put a link to the prop getters in the Discord for folks to take a look at. But yeah, it sounds very similar to prop getters, and I think that it's a perfectly reasonable sort of hook to create for situations where you're doing the same thing in a lot of different places. So yeah, sounds cool. I think actually this blog post was written before hooks. Yeah, so we're using classes and stuff in this example. In Epic React, I show a prop getter pattern with hooks in the advanced patterns workshop. So
yeah, I'll take a look. I'm just in the US now, so I can access the course because I bought it in Brazil. So once I'm back, I can take a look at it. Okay,
well, yeah, that I'm gonna. Yago, you do so much for the community. I'm just gonna give you a pro license. So I'll send you a message here later. You're awesome. I really appreciate you. Yeah. absolutely. Okay, so Raphael asked earlier. Here, actually, let me just double check. Yeah. If it's possible that browsers like Chrome or Firefox could keep a cache of React. Yeah, I remember seeing this. This is a question that it's a tale as old as time. Like people ask this question all the time, all the way back to jQuery. Why don't they just build jQuery into the browser or cache it or something? So there are good reasons that they don't, and I'm glad that they don't. With jQuery, they actually did build it into the browser in many respects. So that's, query selector and query selector all that were heavily inspired by jQuery. And so over time, the really good and foundational ideas get into the browsers. But actually, what Raphael is asking about specifically is caching React or Vue or Angular, their latest version. So first of all, you wouldn't want to just cache the latest version because that, well, I guess if there was some way for you to communicate, I'm using version X, and then the browser could say, oh, I've got version X in my cache, so I'll just use that. Yeah, like that, I suppose could be, might be useful for a very small fraction of the sites that happen to be on the latest version. So for it to be useful, you'd want to do all versions of React. And for that, you're starting, if you want to do React, but then, oh, we also have React DOM, and oh, like most apps are using React query or React router, and then we've got all the Angular side of things. Pretty soon, somebody installing a browser, they're going to be downloading so much stuff that most of the time, frankly, they're not going to need. The other problem here is you would have to have all of the browsers agree. Otherwise, your app just won't work on the other browsers. Now, there could be an API that says, if you don't have this, then here's how you go get it. You could do something like that. But I just don't see there being a huge, like that being as useful as you might think. And it just, like I said, it just ends up being so much stuff that it would not really be feasible. And let's not forget, like lots of these browsers are installed on mobile devices too. And that's where most of the benefits are going to come from anyway. The desktop is like, yeah, it'll download it, install it really quick, typically. But on a mobile device, you're on a spotty network and it's a lower powered device. You don't want to have most of your phone taken up by a bunch of JavaScript, versions of JavaScript libraries that most of them you'll never use. So yeah, I think that's why this is not going to happen. Now, it used to be that you could use a CDN and everybody could use the same CDN. So Google had a CDN and they'd have like a jQuery on there and a bunch of other popular libraries. And the idea was that you could just say, instead of using your own version of jQuery, you just point to Google CDN, or there's this JS CDN, JS Deliver. There are lots of these, but everybody would point to that one thing, and then that could be saved in the browser cache. This is like a spec that's been around forever. And then any site that used that same URL for that particular JavaScript file, the browser would already have it in its cache. Unfortunately, this ended up being a way to track people online. And so this is no longer a thing that browsers do. And instead, each cache for each domain is separate from each other. Yeah, I think I learned about this pretty recently. So that's kind of unfortunate. I mean, I understand. I don't want to be tracked on the internet. But so yeah, now it doesn't really, there's still benefit to using a CDN. Don't get me wrong. There are other reasons we use CDNs, but that particular reason is no longer a thing. So yeah, I'll just take this opportunity to talk about Remix really quick. So one cool thing about Remix and the way that they do caching for the JavaScript resources is they actually have taken a different approach from most bundlers and stuff. So with bundlers like Webpack, you'd take all of your JavaScript and put it into one file, and then you'd send it off. And then maybe you went into the bowels of Webpack config and you figured out how to do chunks for your vendor chunk and your application code chunk. And so then you could send those separately. And the reason for that was so that any change you made to your application wouldn't invalidate the hash and the cache on your vendor stuff. But unfortunately, you still run into the problem where if you update a single dependency, then that whole vendor chunk is no longer valid. Like that cache can go away and you send a new one. So this is sad, sad reality. So with Remix, they actually will bundle each node module dependency individually and serve just that one. And so the only time that will ever get updated or like that cache will get invalidated is when you update that specific dependency. So if you're on the same version of LeftPad for years, then you will never need to change the hash. You'll never, that cache will stay forever and it works great. And so like this has a lot of cool implications, and it's relying heavily on HTTP2 so that we can do that multiplexing and just send tons and tons of files over the same SSL or what's the word I'm looking for? You do the single handshake and then just send a ton of stuff over that same thing. So that same connection. So yeah, that's just my opportunity to say how awesome Remix is, and that they just think about this caching sort of thing a lot. So if you haven't looked at Remix, give it a solid look. It's awesome. Anyway, cool. So Mohit asked a question. As far as I know, old versions of Create React App. Oh wait, yeah, that was in answer to Raphael's thing, I think. Okay. Luke is asking, hey Kent, I would like to know, how do you prevent your projects from downloading malicious NPM packages? Oh yes, I remember seeing this one. How is it that PayPal, for example, or for testing library? And also, how do you trust the maintainers of old open source projects? Thank you. Okay, so this is sad. So there was an article a while back, and I think I talked about it on an office hours before. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, here it is. I'm harvesting credit card numbers and passwords from your site. Here's how. This is on HackerNoon, and I will add a link to this in our in the Discord. But this tells a terrifying story of something that totally could happen, but totally did not. He's just saying, I could have done this, but I didn't actually do it. But yeah, like it totally could work. I have no good answer for this. So yeah, like it's honestly, it's kind of amazing to me that so many big companies are totally cool just installing stuff from NPM. That maybe that package itself is fine, but it depends on another package that depends on another package that depends on another package that had a problem. And this is like the event stream event or thing that happened. Let me find it on NPM. Yeah, details about the event stream incident. So this was another thing relevant to our conversation here. Yeah, it's crazy stuff. So what happened with the event stream is the maintainer of the, so first of all, event stream is very, very popular package. It's used by ESLint and various other very popular packages. And what happened is the maintainer of event stream was no longer interested in maintaining it. And somebody came in and started helping maintain it over the course of a few weeks and was solving issues and bugs and stuff. And eventually the maintainer is like, hey, I'm not really interested in doing this anymore. I don't want to get the emails on all this stuff. I'm moving on. So would you like to take it over? And they're like, yeah, sweet, sure. And then they installed a crypto wallet stealer sort of thing. It was looking for crypto wallets on your machine, and then published that version. I think they added it as a dependency, at like a few transitive dependencies or something like that. So it was very hard to track. And as soon as that was published, like so many people installed this package. Luckily, it was only looking for crypto wallets. It could have been doing much worse things, like getting people's NPM credentials and then publishing itself, like a worm on NPM. Like this is a thing that could happen. It's crazy. This is actually why I'm not logged in to NPM on my machine, so that I can't do that. So yeah, it's terrifying. And we just trust everybody. I really have no good answer for this. For myself, when I am no longer interested in a project and I'm ready to move on or whatever, unless I have a very long and established relationship with co-maintainers, like I did with testing library, I archive it. I say, I'm done maintaining this. If you want to continue this, then you're going to publish a fork. And it'll be on a different name and everything. Because I just don't want to be, I don't want to have another event stream incident. It's just sad. It's crazy. So yeah, the answer is, I don't know. Now Dino is taking an interesting approach here where you have to explicitly enable certain features for when you run a script. Now, I think, and I'm not sure exactly how all that works, but I think they're thinking a lot more about security this time around, and so we'll see if that ends up being a thing that people use. So, okay, cool. So let me just take a look at what else we've got here. Henry, first timer. Hi there, Henry. Welcome. Do you like what we have? That we have our video on or not? Yes, I do. I think that's great if you have your video on. Oh, it's you. Hi, Henry. Yeah, I think that's great. Yes, I agree. I think it's nicer. So if you can turn your video on, I appreciate it. It just makes the whole experience more human. So welcome. Okay. Yago.
Do you actually mind if I jump in quick?
Yeah. What's up?
Sweet. And it might not make sense since you can't screen share, but would it make sense to look at a TypeScript question?
Yeah, sure. I can try and I'll do my best.
Yeah. Do you want me to just paste the link in the Discord?
Yeah, sure.
Cool. It is a gross, ugly link.
Yeah. Fine. Okay, cool. I'm up.
Sweet. So here's my question. What I'm trying to do is the lines 8 and 9. I'm basically like looking at something coming in and making sure that it's got a certain field. And I'm curious if that doubling up is necessary. Like if I have to declare the type and declare the identical array of fields to check, or if there's like some TypeScript magic I'm missing.
Well, first of all, sorry, I got hung up really quick on the on line 8. Yep. So you're saying key of pick to do, and with the pick, you're saying I want to grab the these types out of this type or interface.
Those are the only 2 fields I care about.
Right. Yeah. And so if you hover over the other info keys, that that type ends up just being the string last updated or views, which is what you passed to pick in the first place. And so I'm not sure why you need to do key of pick type to do. You just do last update.
Just do it.
Yeah. Is that
sense?
Is that right? Like, am I confused there?
No, that's probably, that I didn't even think.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
That's like totally redundant.
Yeah. No, you're totally good. That doesn't answer your question, does it?
No, the part that I'm like, this just seems silly that I have to like do this twice. Like I have to declare the 2 keys and then I have to put those 2 keys also in an array because the array is the like, if one of these exists, do something, but I have to type the array with the keys so that later on I can do the index signature. If you look at the bottom, you'll see the one without the keys has the error because like label could be a string or whatever.
Okay. Yeah, hold on. Let me just see. So this other info labels no keys.
It's like if you define the array without defining the type.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Sort of trying to throw 2 examples in there for you.
I see. So what you're saying is this other info labels, we have to explicitly type it as an array that only has those two properties in it. And what you're concerned about is on line 9. You don't want to have to specify that array. Is that?
I guess, like, is it necessary to double that up, like define the type and define the array with the identical two keys? Or is there some like utility that I'm not thinking of? Like, oh, if you just did record, then yeah, that works or whatever.
Yeah. Well,
I
so
don't know if
you're,
there
understanding
is,
right.
but-
Just a quick, if I'm understanding it right, I just pasted something in the Discord that might help you. Because
Oh,
the
cool.
second option, you get string array string. If you do as const, is exactly what's in the array.
Cool.
Yep. So if you don't expect to be able to make a change to the array, then as const, that I was going to suggest the same thing, Yago. So that would be a good way to say, hey, TypeScript, I know that arrays typically can't change. I can push and slice and do and dice and stick it in a stew. But if you put as const, you're saying I'm not going to do that.
That
Does that
totally
solve
did.
your problem?
Yeah, 100%. That was it. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah,
Yeah, if
actually,
you put as const after the labels no keys, the error goes away.
awesome.
Yeah,
So
that as const is magic.
yeah, it is. I have my blog post recently about wrapping React use state with TypeScript uses as constant. It dives a little bit deeper into this as well,
Sweet.
if that's useful at all to anybody.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, oh yeah, and Harsh just shared a good talk explaining the event stream hack. Oh, that looks interesting. I'd never seen that, so that sounds interesting. It's terrifying. Okay, so Steve is asking, I just want to make sure I don't miss any of the comments here. Not all the state needs to be stored into the database, but does need to be tied to each specific task. Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like if I'm trying to, and if you can see this UI like right underneath there, like if that swipe, I'm saving that like as if I just like I tried to take like you don't even save whether or not the task is swiped to the database, correct?
Right. Yeah. You wouldn't need to do that.
You need to save it with that individual task because otherwise, like this swipe will open all of them at once. Like am I making sense?
Yeah,
So,
but you don't have to. So you don't necessarily have to save it on the task object itself, though. You could have a swiped object that where the key is the ID of the task, and then the value is true or false. And so then you can look it up and say, should I render this as swiped? And if that task ID is in there, or this could be like a swiped array, and it's all of the elements that are currently swiped.
So I basically just create a different object.
Yep. Yeah, that way you can keep, I think this is a pretty good practice. I used to do, let me say what I used to do. I actually used to do similar to this, where I would just tack on a bunch of properties onto stuff that I'd save in the database. And then I would have this little interceptor before I went and saved anything that would remove all of those properties before sending it off to the database. This became a bit of a nightmare because when you, let me try to, it became a maintenance nightmare where I didn't know which properties I was tacking on to different things. And so I had to keep coming back and forth between these two things, where if you just separate them and say, this is the stuff that gets saved, this is the raw data, anything that gets updated in here is going into the database. And then here's some metadata about those things. It's kind of like not really normalizing it, but yeah, just like getting those two things separate. Made things a lot easier.
And I don't know if you want to move on to somebody else's question, but I added some like these hooks that I got from the use hooks website, and it has that local storage I guess use case that I'm talking about, and it describes what it's used for.
Did you have a specific question about these hooks?
Well, so basically sync state to local storage so it persists through a page refresh. Usage is similar to set state, except we pass in local storage keys so we can default to that value on page load instead of specific initial value. So is that only for the use case when we were talking about when you wanted to save something on page refresh, but you don't want to save it to the URL and you don't want to save it to the database.
Yep.
That
would be a perfect use case for that.
And then I don't know if you want to look at this use Firestore query hook. I was just looking at it and it looks like it's kind of a mix between React query and use and snapshot Firestore. So I don't know if you want to take a look at that and tell me what.
Yeah, it looks great. I actually go to usehooks.com occasionally myself to look at stuff, and it's yeah, I remember when Gabe created it years. Yeah, it's been a while for a long time. Yeah, it's great. So
that would add additional caching and performance onto what Firestore already offers.
So it doesn't look like they're doing much caching now. Well, it's sort of is. So the interesting thing about state that you're loading and then like anytime you're using a client library and you're saying, okay, I need to render stuff based on state, you need to take the stuff you get from the database and store it in a variable. That variable is a cache. So regardless of like if you're using it with a framework or anything, once you put something you got from the back end into a variable, that variable becomes a cache. And so yes, technically this is a cache. Now it doesn't look like they're persisting it in local storage or anything. And they do make sure that their cache is always initialized from Firestore and updated from Firestore as those updates come in. And so you end up like that ends up working out just fine because there will be some out of sync time in the time that it takes for Firestore to say, hey, I have a new value. That like couple milliseconds or maybe even a couple seconds is where you have some stale cache values. But there's not a whole lot that we can do about that. That's just like part of the challenge of the web is network latency and yeah, so we just do the very best that we can. You also can't avoid making a variable, especially when you're using a framework like this. So you have to embrace the fact that you are using a cache. At the bottom here, it does talk about the React query as another thing that you could use. And this is one of the nice things about React queries. We have to embrace the fact that we're caching state from the back end. We cannot trust that it's always up to date, but we can give ourselves the right knobs to turn for when to invalidate the cache and when to just go with it and hope we're showing the user the latest information or as recent information as they need. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah.
Okay. This hook looks fine. I imagine there's a library that has this very hook in it or something like it that you could try to use if you wanted to. So, cool. Fun stuff. It is almost 10:30, so we're almost done here. Harsh is asking, can you talk more about adoption of Dino, where I see it going? I don't know, honestly. So like early on for me, I was pretty into being on the bleeding edge of Node. Well, I was never super into being on the bleeding edge of Node, honestly. And I feel the same way with Dino. It's something very interesting, and I hope that they're successful in what they're doing because I think it's great to explore these things. As far as like adoption and stuff, it is so hard to beat inertia. You just have to be so much better than the previous thing. It took me years to get people to go to testing library instead of Enzyme, which they'd been using for years. So yeah, inertia is very difficult to beat. You have to be a lot better than the alternative or than the one that was first. And Dino has a lot of really awesome things about it, and a lot of people are really excited about it. And maybe it is a lot better than Node. But like Node is just such a huge and foundational piece of what people are doing and building web applications that it has to be a lot better for people to make a switch. This is the same thing, maybe to a lesser degree with React, where like it's just so hard for other frameworks to be very compelling or to get a huge market share of what people are building with, because React is just so good and it's really entrenched in what we like how we build our applications, and like a lot of mind share too. Like we know React, we'd have to go and learn something else. There's just has to be a really compelling reason to do that. And no framework has done that for me, and that's why I'm still focused on React. So Dino and Node, that's an even bigger thing. Do I see it ever, like everybody switching over to Dino at some point in the future? I don't know. I can't say. I'm leaning to no, honestly. I feel like it is different, and it brings a lot of great things to the table. But I just don't think it's different enough to be that compelling. But I could be wrong. I'd be happy to be wrong. Dino seems like it has a lot of really awesome things about it. But I'm not going to be the one leading the charge. This is not the area where I lead. If we're talking about Remix, then sure, yeah, I'll lead the charge on Remix. But yeah, like that's just not my area of things I get excited about. I use Node to build tools, and yeah, I don't build. At PayPal I built applications with Node, but yeah, I don't really do a whole lot. Node is a tool for me, where React is like a lifestyle. No, it's not really, but like it's what I do. So anyway, hopefully that is at least semi-interesting, Harsh.
If you have time, I want to build on that kind of question a little bit.
Yeah, sure. What's up?
Yeah, so like I've always been kind of curious since you mentioned Node, about like the viability of using Node on your backend, like with Express versus something like Go or PHP or C# or any other backend language. And on one side it's easier to write and develop code and maintain code, but on the other side there's like always that question of efficiency and whether maybe other languages are. So I don't know, could you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. Like you've noticed, or maybe you've noticed that lots of even JavaScript tooling things are starting to be written in other languages. Like ES Build is a really hyped up one right now, because I think it's built in Go, and it's just way faster than everything else, like ridiculously faster than everything else at compiling TypeScript and JavaScript and bundling and everything. And that's exciting to me. I think that's awesome. I don't really particularly care for what the tool is written in. I can tell you that if it's not written in JavaScript, I'm not going to be able to contribute very much until I start getting into those languages, which is very unlikely. I plan on sticking with JavaScript until I retire or the computers take over, which I think computers might take over before I retire. I don't know. But yeah, so there's that aspect of it. Like, how many people will you be able to hire? There are plenty of Go developers in the world, or Elixir. Yeah, Iago mentioned Elixir's kind of trending. I know that Code Sandbox is actually written in Elixir, the backend. And so, yeah, there are other languages that are certainly more efficient for different things. But JavaScript has eaten the world. And I think that's a big reason that so many companies are using Node, is because you just have so many people who know JavaScript and who can contribute to those things. Wow, Nikhil just shared ESLint in Rust. That is awesome, actually. Yeah, so you see these tools, lots of these tools where we're reaching the limits on how fast Node can be. They're being rewritten in other languages. That's cool. I just won't be participating in that. Not because I don't think it's a good idea, but because I don't want to learn another language. I just want to stick with JavaScript. And frankly, like I contributed to ESLint. I've contributed to to a bunch of tools. I contributed to Babel. And I think I've contributed to Webpack. Like I'm definitely a drive-by contributor to lots of these projects, but I was never really a strong contributor to these projects. And so I'm more on the next layer of abstraction, where I build things that help you use those tools better or something like that. And so to me, it's irrelevant what those tools are written in, as long as I can interface with them using JavaScript, which of course you typically can. And so, yeah, I don't know. I don't have too many thoughts on that, I guess.
Thanks. Yeah. Definitely interested to hear like different perspectives on, what people think about this.
Cool. Okay, as we're just wrapping up here really quick. Yeah, Steve, I don't think that I'll have time to jump into that code sandbox. Somebody asked a question here in the Discord chat. Just a reminder, make sure to put questions in, or sorry, in the Zoom chat. Make sure to put questions in Discord so everybody can see it. But let me just look at this really quick. Yeah, so the question is problems with re-renders. So actually, I have a blog post that I'm going to share to answer that, and then we're going to wrap up. So it's called "Fix the Slow Render Before You Fix the Re-Render," and go give that a look. Okay, I got to wrap this up. So just a reminder for everybody: the Discord is where we do all of this stuff, and we now have this concept of meetups. This means that anybody can host their own office hours. They can do whatever they want through the Discord. You can say, hey, I do stuff, and you can follow me and be notified when I start meetups. Office hours is technically a meetup. You can do your office hours. You could do this to like play an online game together or something like it. The sky is the limit. So long as it's within the code of conduct, you're welcome to do it on the Discord. And so definitely check it out. It's very similar to Clubhouse as far as I understand it. I don't have an iOS device, so I don't. Yeah, so come to check it out. It's actually really exciting. I'm going to write a longer blog post to explain how this all works. But I'm hoping that more people do this sort of thing, because I think I'm not the only one who has things to offer in this way. So I think it's awesome to give that opportunity for folks. So anyway, look forward to chatting with you all again next week, and I will see you around on the internet. I'll probably be live streaming today. I'm thinking about live streaming, migrating my Discord bot to TypeScript. I really regret not having switched or started it with TypeScript, because the Discord JS library that I use is all written in TypeScript, and so it has great typing. It'd be really nice to get some of that. So anyway, I'm gonna wrap this up. Thanks everybody for showing up. We'll see you all